My name is Troy Faddis, licensed marriage and family therapist.
And I'm Dr. Maddie Leaving. I'm the clinical director at Legacy Outdoor Adventures in Juniper Canyon.
And today we are going to talk about how our attachment style influences the way that we fight. And by learning to address our attachment style and offer comfort to our fear, we can change our fighting style with those that we love most.
Which implies that we're always going to fight.
Right.
It's impossible to not have conflict in a relationship. And so rather than trying to pretend that we don't, we may as well just address it.
We all are in conflict. In fact, a lot of the research says, like in couples therapy, that couples who are happy and those who are on the brink of a ruined relationship, they fight as much, or I should say, they fight as often, and they fight about the same things. The difference is couples who are happy, it's how they fight or how they have conflict, how they respond to conflict with each other that makes the biggest difference. And because of that, they're able to get out of it quickly. Couples who don't, who fight negatively, they stay in that conflict continuously until the next one begins.
Because conflict is inevitable. You can never always be on the same page with everybody you care about.
And I think we don't address sometimes we just try to manage behavior, we try to manage schema, change our thoughts, or we try to compromise. And I'm sure at times that's necessary, but I don't know that we actually take the time to recognize what is the majority of our conflict is really about. And the majority of our conflict has a lot to do with our need for secure attachment, in particular to the primary people in our lives. We want to feel close to them. We want to feel safe with them. We want to know that they're there for us.
Or the fear of losing that connection and not having that attachment. Those are the primary fight places.
And when we don't address those primary fight areas, we tend to fight about the small stuff. When we don't address the primary need, like you said, then we fight about the small stuff. Everything we do is a bid for us to discover whether or not they do care, they do love, they are committed. And so we end up arguing about the silly things like, did you do your homework? Did you get up in time? Who did the most work around the house? Did you go to school? Did you get to your job on time? How do you squeeze the toilet or the toothpaste, or which directions does the toilet paper go in the bathroom? Up and over or down and under? Everything of that becomes a bid for our reassurance or our confirmation that we matter to that person. So once we become insecure, we move into these roles and into the insecure styles of attachment, and into a role of either being avoidant on one end or fearful on the other. So if we're really avoidant, we withdraw. That becomes part of our style and part of our fighting style, which is to just shut down or just stonewall. It can either shut down in a people don't know what's going on with us, or we can shut down in a really obvious way, but we're shutting down. The other side of that is being very fearful, where we want the attachment desperately, and in the middle is we're anxious, and we may lean a little bit more towards the fearful style, we may lean a bit more towards the avoidance style, but it's a hybrid of the two where we feel really anxious. In fact, so here we can see the avoidant is in the bottom left corner, where they have a positive view of themselves, which is why it's easier for them to pull inward, but a real negative view of other people. And because they feel negative about other people, the easiest solution is to pull away. They become really independent, really self-reliant. And so they tell themselves, I don't need her. Or then the other side of that is the fearful attachment, where they have a negative view of self and a negative view of others. Because they want that reassurance from everyone, they're constantly looking for closeness. And they can be totally disorganized in their emotions, not just like executive functioning wise, but their emotions are disorganized So they're feel for making connections while they also need the connections. And so they're constantly trying to find a way to pursue it. It can be really aggressive, like, I'm going to fight for this. I'm going to do whatever I have to get you to react and prove to me that you see me or that I matter. And they may be really manipulative, a little bit more passive aggressive. They may even be clingy, emotionally like absorbing, but they're trying to get their need met of that fearful attachment. And again, like in the middle is anxious. So anxious can sometimes bend a little bit to the fearful side, a little bit to the avoidance side, but they still have a negative view for themselves and a positive view of others. And they tend to be pretty dependent. They're really afraid of losing the relationship, a lot of highs and lows, and they can also be aggressive and avoidant.
They have a tendency to subjugate their needs to someone else in the hope that that person is more capable of keeping everything afloat, especially them, and they'll take care of them. And that leads to a lot of times really negative relationships as well, especially if the partner is more of a predator. Can take advantage. Like that ends up a lot of times in the domestic violence realm. Can, end up with anxious attachment who, sees that this person is important in their life and they're going to do whatever they have to in order to be able to keep that relationship, and they're fearful that they'll leave them. And of course, the secure attachment is a positive view of self, positive view of others, interdependent, comfortable with emotional intimacy, comfortable with closeness, and overall healthy relationship bond.
And we all move into secure. Like there's a lot of times, maybe even most of the time, we do have a secure attachment with our primary figures. We often have conflict that moves us out of alignment with them, and then we tend to find one of these styles that is our favorite.
Yeah, it seems like a lot of times with the families that we work with, and even I notice this in my own family, is that the parents have a tendency to find themselves sometimes in that anxious attachment or fearful attachment, and their son or daughter is in the avoidant attachment. And so you get that approach, avoidant, withdrawer, and the pursuer. And it's good. The pursuing is out of anxiety and fear, and the avoiding is that they just can't handle, all of that, and they're just trying to maintain by moving away and stonewalling, basically.
And a lot of it's because we're always trying to get back into a secure attachment. We often get out of it because our needs aren't being met. And so we're experiencing a lot of what we call secondary emotions. So here in this graphic, it shows how above the line is where a lot of the times we're fighting. We end up having a secondary emotion, and they can be the same emotions, but the need behind them are different. So like example, anger is a really common secondary emotion. I can't believe you do this. I can't believe you'd say this. Or, I'm so hurt. Being really irritable, a lot of frustration or a resentment. That's one of the reasons why in step 4, we're doing part of our moral searching fearless moral inventory is noticing the resentments and the impact resentments are having on us and having secondary emotions, because our behaviors, especially for like someone who's moved, typically is to withdraw, is to use a substance. It helps us be silent and distant and shut down. It is a place where we can easily become defensive, especially if we're talking about our modality of withdrawing, which might be substance use.
And part of the conflict is that we don't get below that dotted line and get to a place where we actually can either recognize or reach out and share those primary emotions. And we just keep circling around between the secondary emotions, the behaviors of the withdrawer, the behaviors of the pursuer, the secondary emotions, and then back around again, without ever getting deep into the process and taking that big arrow in the middle and going down deep enough to get to those primary emotions.
So how does attachment theory help us understand our fighting style? The types of attachment we have, the type of emotional reactivity, so like our secondary emotions and then the behaviors that come from that, tend to create or where we adopt a favorite role. that we will often play when we. So, oh, one thing I wanted to say about secondary emotions. I forgot to talk to the parents about this today. Is that secondary emotions have a purpose. First and foremost, they are helping us create a boundary.
Yes, that's important.
They are protective, and not just protective of ourselves. They're also protective of our relationship. They're protective of the attachment that we have with that person. And that's what, so again, is like, that's why sometimes when we're angry, it's not just, we're not just trying to say, I'm being angry to protect myself and making it difficult for you to want to be in a relationship with me. Sometimes what anger is really saying is, this relationship is so important to me. It's not the way it has been, the way that I need it to be. And so I'm protesting that. That's why I'm angry. And then the third thing that secondary emotions do is that they're driving towards a goal. They're boundary making, they are protective, and they are driving towards a goal. That's the inherent job of secondary emotions. So when we start to fight, we tend to fight in these types of styles. Probably the most common is the middle one, because we tend to have a protester or someone who's pursuing the other person with their secondary emotions. Like, for example, the anger. Why did you do this? How could you say such a thing? I can't believe this happened. It can be criticisms. It can escalate to have contempt in it, but we're trying to protest the thing that's not being met. The other person in our relationship most often takes the opposite role. That's their job in this attachment pattern, which is to defend and withdraw. So they may be their secondary emotions, they may be irritable too, they may be frustrated too, but they may also be full of resentments. Like, why does this person always say this to me? Why can't they see all the stuff that I do? Why are they always so negative? And instead of expressing that back, they hold it in because they've learned that if they say something, it just makes it worse. So the most common fighting style is attack, defend.
And even in the defending, though, they can be saying, "Well, I didn't mean to have that happen," or "I had to, I had to go to work," or "I had, something happening that made it so that I had to make that happen," or "You don't understand me. You don't get what's going on with me." And so there's that defended, so they can't even hear if there was real feedback. They can't hear the feedback because they're so defended, and they're rationalizing, justifying, minimizing, and all that kind of stuff in order to be able to make whatever happen okay. But it's still in the process of attack and defend, and it's still in the approach and withdraw. So it's still the pursuer and the withdrawer stance of attachment style.
And at times, we have two people whose core mode is to attack, or what I call, Dr. Gottman calls attack, counterattack. And sometimes we also switch our position where our defensiveness has gone from being withdrawn to I've had enough. And so we see our fighting styles switch to attack, attack, counterattack. And we can escalate really quickly in this pattern, and we end up saying things that are really hurtful. When we're in this pattern, we tend to go for the emotional jugular.
Yeah, and then it's one-upmanship. Sandbagging, sometimes it's called, is just throwing everything at them, including the kitchen sink. And that can be some of the most harmful and hurtful interactions.
It's like when we have, like, remember, the secondary emotions, they're goal driven. And so we may not say what we're saying, we may not actually be meaning. We're not trying to hurt in the ways that is probably being received. We're trying to get the other person to see our point of view. We're trying to get the other person to behave in the way we want them to behave. We're goal driven. But in that context, we will say really hurtful things to try to accomplish that goal.
Mm-hmm.
even if we don't mean it.
And because we're close to each other and we know each other well, we know each other's hurtful places. And so we push those really, really painful buttons. And so that's why it can be so painful and so wounding to the attachment. Mm-hmm. And that's where a lot of our attachment wounds get caused. Tears, attachment tears is what it feels like. It's kind of rips in the fabric of attachment.
Yeah. And then, sometimes we have two people who are just fundamentally avoidant. So there's the silence and the silence, but they're inside brewing. But I also find maybe more often that this cycle has been going on for so long. One person who's often been the attacker finally just gives up. And like, I just can't do it anymore. And we end up having that silent position. A lot of times this stuff just happens. Like it's unconscious because it's all secondary emotions. We're stuck in these ways of fighting. We're not aware of like what is really going on, what our real need is, what we're really trying to accomplish. And so one of the best ways to disrupt and improve this pattern is looking for, all the secondary emotions and the primary emotions actually, but particularly the emotion of fear. Because I think that a lot of the times during conflict in particular, fear is what drives the withdrawal. Fear is what drives the pursuit.
Right.
Most of the time, although the actions are different, what drives it is the same. Fear, and a lot of times I think when people have fear, their first reaction is to ignore it, to dismiss it, to mislabel it, to shame, whatever they have to do to like not even acknowledge that it's there. And so really be careful to not try to dismiss fear or make fear move on too quickly. Fear is like our canary in the coal mine. It's our early warning detection system. Once we start experiencing fear, and the earlier we catch it, because if we don't catch it soon enough, fear can take over and we'll be in the driver's seat. And even if we want to stop ourselves, we often don't or cannot. So catching it as early as we can, like, oh, there's the alarm button. There's the warning sign. Let's go through a mindfulness practice. Let me go and search and find what are my fears? Let's name them. Maybe I feel, and let me come back to another, that I feel rejected. That's what my fear of being rejected by this person, if they really knew me, if they find out what I've done, that if they really knew me, they would know that underneath all of this, I'm actually inadequate, that I have this imposter syndrome going on. And I'm afraid that if they knew me, I'd be unimportant to them. And that's what's often fueling the secondary emotion.
Unworthy, I think, is sometimes where we go. Is that
Yep.
If you really knew me, you'd know that I'm really a piece of crap and I don't deserve connection. And so that sometimes gets into the primary emotions, and that's a core. Notice in this diagram, fear is at the bottom of all of it, and it's overwhelming and debilitating fear that keeps you from being able to do anything. But if you see fear instead, and you can notice it in your body, you can tell where your fear is coming from with a sick stomach, or your heart going faster, or feeling of tightness in your chest, or the blood coming up your throat, and all of or even just feeling frozen, like you can't move. The worst fears, I think, is when I've been frozen, trying to hike up a rock slide and the rock started moving. I remember freezing on this ascent and not being able to move at all, just completely frozen. And sometimes that fear will do that to you. You'll actually get completely stopped. But if we can do that, if we can say, okay, this is fear, and what it's doing is it's a red flag. It's a stop sign. It's a whatever, like, wait, stop. You've got to pay attention to what's going on around you. And you've got to pay attention to what's going on inside of you, because then you can start to going into the next part, which is seeing what the fear is about, and then deepening that into the next level, which is finding what your needs are that emerge from the fears. And I know you want to expand a little bit more on that, seeing what the fear is about, Troy. I'll let you go there.
Even though At the beginning, when working with someone, I really want to be in the present moment and just helping them find the fears. But once they found them, I think it is really is valuable to explore, where did this fear like first come from?
Yep.
What experiences have I had in my childhood, in important relationships in my past, in my current relationship? Also, traumatic experiences. A lot of times, seeing what our fear is about comes from one of those places, comes from experiences in our childhood, critical moments in important relationships from our past, in our current relationship, the pain that we maybe have had experienced, and from trauma that we have had in our lives. And be able to like see that, name it, and notice that this is why I'm so quick to react when I see my important person pulling away from me. This is why I paralyze.
And the hard thing about trauma specifically is that at the bottom of trauma is a fear that you're really deeply not okay, that somehow whatever happened to you was your fault, that you somehow caused it because you were somehow broken. And the core fear is that I really am unworthy of love and unworthy of connection, and that I deserve abandonment. Then you get stuck into that deepening fear of losing those attachments. And then unfortunately, a lot of times, rather than just waiting to see how it plays out, we actually make it happen faster. And we sabotage relationships. And instead of waiting for the other shoe to drop, so to speak, we grab it and throw it. And then people see us pushing them away, causing more abandonment because you're creating the abandonment, because you fear the abandonment. It just becomes a really negative cycle.
Yeah.
And it seems to happen a lot with any kind of trauma, but it can happen in any kind of relationships and attachments.
The last step in this is finding what our fear needs. In what ways does our fear need to be reassured that it's safe? In what ways do our fears need security, and from whom and in what way? In what ways are fears trying to get soothing from ourselves and from others? And just the fact that our fears often feel like they're doing this alone, they just want to be seen. And when we can start to address our fears, needs, and meet them ourselves, but also asking important people to help us meet those needs, then our fighting style changes. Instead of our fighting style being attack, counterattack, attack, defend, or silent, silent, we move into, and it's a process, so it's like we're moving slowly from these other quadrants back into a secure attachment style. And when we have conflict from a secure attachment style, we tend to not make the same moves because the person we're talking to, their pain is as important to us as our own. And so we don't need to attack back or be defensive. We can be in their pain, even if we're the ones that helped create the pain in the first place. We're able to show up for their need in that moment. And as we help meet their needs, we're not attacking, we're not defending, we're not withdrawing, both of us silent, but we're actually meeting each other's needs, finding solutions, resolving the hurts, finding what needs to be done. We're moving beyond.
I like the way that you said that too on that last phrase, is that, can you go back to that last slide, the fears, is that finding your needs emerging from your fears. So we always have needs, and sometimes we subjugate those, and we don't think that we can have, ask for, the things that we need. But if you can allow them to emerge, sort of like the lady of the lake, coming up out of the water, it's like emerging from the fear, and then you can begin to see what those needs are, and then you can begin to ask for what you need to be able to have those needs met, or you can start advocating for yourself, or you can start meeting those needs yourself. And usually in of course in relationships, it's a reach, and the reach is this is my primary emotion, and it's painful for me. I'm being overwhelmed by my fear. I love you so much, I don't want to lose you. I'm afraid that I'm not good enough for you, or I'm not enough for you. And you can begin to share those and reach out, and take the risk as those needs emerge, to be able to ask for what you need to have those needs met.
I hope that this helps, and I encourage you all to to just explore secondary emotions. How many and how often am I having? And just noticing, am I setting boundaries? Am I trying to be protective? Do I feel like I need to accomplish a goal? Then pause. See if you notice the fear and the deeper emotions that are going on. And as you are more expressive and own those, see if your fighting patterns improve. If they move away from the attack, defend, or attack, show up for each other, making the other people's pain as important to you as your own.
And I like what you said earlier too, Troy, is that in that process, as you're exploring your own fears, your own secondary and primary emotions, get curious about the person, the relationship that you have with your primary person. What are their secondary emotions, their primary emotions, and give them an opportunity to share those with you, and then reflect those back to them. What I hear you saying is you're struggling with fears as well. You're struggling with whatever you can kind of be curious about, but it's about asking, seeking to understand from the Anatomy of Peace influence pyramid. But the idea is try to understand where they're coming from, so that it's your fears where they intersect with that person's, and understand them. And I like just using that phrase of being curious about what's going on for them and trying to understand from their standpoint what's happening as well.
Yeah, I think it's important also to mention that secondary emotions creates a dilemma for us in doing what you just said.
It's true.
And that secondary emotions almost force us to see a view of ourselves. And primary emotions allow us to have a view of what the other person is doing. So if we're stuck in our secondary emotions, we're probably only in our own experience. And I think like forcing us to adopt a stance of curiosity helps us start to access ours and theirs primary emotions, because now we've become interested, curious about what is their pain, what are they talking about, what is going on for them. And the more I can take and adopt a stance of understanding their experience, a view of them, the less I'm going to be insistent that they have a view of what's going on for me.
And then you begin to value what's happening with them as much as you value what's happening with you.
Yep.
And that is the outward mindset.
I was thinking, Maddie, as I was watching, you have your mask around your neck, and behind you, you have a container of Clorox wipes.
Yep.
And I think I wish if we could just be as precautious as we do this, because it's unconscious for so many of us, and so it used to be before COVID. Touching, wiping germs. Like if we could be as deliberate as we are about wearing our mask and using disinfectant and bleach as we are now, do that in our relationships and and exploring the emotions that we have and they have, it will probably lead to a different style of conflict and resolution.
Yeah.
So thank you all for joining us. I want you to stay happy, stay healthy, and stay engaged.
See you, bye.